Because one of the most important properties of a junior developer is the fact that you can turn them into a senior developer. And that's one of the crucial things that any organization needs. It needs that ability to generate more people within. I mean, one of our biggest strengths always at ThoughtWorks is we're very good at turning junior people with promise into senior people who are really, really good. And that's a core strength that I'm glad to note internally we still recognize, because that's going to be, I think, more and more important in the future as we learn to make use of the ever-changing roles of technology. And I think it's something other organizations need to look at as well. The most important value you have in a less experienced software developer is the ability to turn them into somebody who is more experienced and knows your domain and how to make use of the technology landscape that you're in.
Hey, Luca here. Welcome to a new episode of the Refactoring podcast, where every 2 weeks we interview some of the best, most thoughtful and accomplished tech leaders in the world. Today's guest is Martin Fowler, who truly needs no introduction. Martin is Chief Scientist at ThoughtWorks. He is one of the original signatories of the Agile Manifesto and author of several legendary books, among which there is Refactoring, which shares the name with this podcast and this newsletter. With Martin, we talked about the impact of AI on software development, from the development process to how human learning and understanding changes, up to the future of software engineering jobs. Then we explored the technical debt metaphor, why it has been so successful, and Martin's own advice on dealing with it. And finally, we talked about the state of Agile, the resistance that still exists today towards many Agile practices, and how to measure engineering effectiveness. So let's dive right into it after a short word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a SaaS app, at some point your customers will start asking for enterprise features like SAML authentication, scheme provisioning, and fine-grained authorization. That's where WorkOS comes in, making it fast and painless to add enterprise features to your app. Their APIs are easy to understand, so you can ship quickly and get back to building other features. WorkOS also provides a free user management solution called AuthKit, a complete out-of-the-box user management system that's free for the first million users. It's a drop-in replacement for Auth0 and comes standard with useful features like domain verification, role-based access control, bot protection, and MFA. It's powered by Redix components, which means zero compromises in design. You get limitless customizations as well as modular templates designed for quick integrations. Today, hundreds of the fastest growing startups are powered by WorkOS, including ones you probably know, like Cursor, Vercel, and Perplexity. So check it out at workos.com to learn more. That's workos.com. Hey Martin, welcome and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Thank you. So, Martin, you really need no introduction. You are the chief scientist at ThoughtWorks. You're a software development legend, one of the original signatories of the Agile Manifesto. And you're the author of many books, including Refactoring, which shares the name with my own newsletter. And it's no coincidence because your work, your books, your blog as well, were one of my big inspirations when I started the newsletter. So, first of all, thank you for that.
Thank you.
You're also the owner of refactoring.com, so I may or may not take advantage of this chat to ask you if you're ever thinking of selling the domain.
No, I'm afraid not. I have a definite fondness for it, so I'm sticking to it, even though I probably wouldn't do that now because I just put everything on the martinfowler.com domain, and is a little bit more awkward to have a separate domain, but I'm fond of it, so I'm sticking with it.
Okay, I had to ask, I guess. So that's fine, but I expected the answer.
Good.
So let's dive into the action, because I mentioned your blog, which I love. As a matter of fact, when I started the newsletter, I had a few newsletters that I loved, blogs that I loved, and yours was definitely one of them. And in the past couple of years, I really appreciated the articles that you published together with other authors at ThoughtWorks, for example, about coding with AI. So I really wanted to pick your brains on this because we are all, I guess, experimenting with how AI is changing the way we code, the software development life cycle at large. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I guess my primary thought is that it's still relatively early days, both in the
Yeah,
development of the technology and in our understanding of how we can best use the technology.
yeah,
I am not particularly hands-on in experimenting with AI myself, partly because I realize that I'm not as deeply engaged in the day-to-day of software development projects as my colleagues. So it's better for me to help my colleagues explore and explain what they've found than it is for me to put the effort in myself. And that, which is generally true
yeah,
of my philosophy with my writing these days anyway. I'm
yeah.
more concerned about helping my colleagues communicate than me trying to swoop in from 50,000 feet and make a guess as to what I'm seeing.
Yeah, yeah,
So, and what a particular colleague that's focusing on this a lot is Birgitta Berkler,
yeah.
who
Read a
has
lot by her.
a sort of regularly, I would like it to be more regularly, updated little page on my website about exploring Gen AI for software development. Her role in ThoughtWorks is actually coordinating how we use AI in software development and what we're learning. And she posts quite
Yeah,
regularly on, well, she, as I said, I'd like her to post more regularly, but she posts regularly enough on the things that she's discovering and some of our other colleagues are discovering. And that's one of the things I tap into particularly, is seeing
yeah,
what she's finding. The overall general message is, I think, of AI generally, is that it's good at coming up with drafts, but
yeah,
you have to look at the drafts
yeah,
because it's going to include mistakes. It's going to include things that aren't as clear as they could be, and you have to look at those drafts and work with that. Which
yeah.
is in some ways a sad thing because a lot of developers, of course, hate reviewing other people's code, and of course, AI is other people's code, and you've got to review it.
Yeah, 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 definitely. No, I agree, and that's what I'm hearing as well. As a matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, I went through the latest Dora report, which explored a lot of insights about the use of AI by teams who are looking into this the most, and there were some surprising findings for myself, at least. I mean, one not surprising finding is it was that it increased individual productivity, individual throughput, apparently. But at the same time, teams that were making heavy use of AI experienced less stability, less delivery success,
Mm.
more bugs. And I guess I guess the trade-off is like we generate more code, but that code is less under our own control. So I don't know what to make out of this, but what does the future look like where we generate a lot more code, but we don't know how to maintain that maybe, or we understand that not just as good as human code.
Yeah, and also one of the troubling aspects of this is also evidence that it reduces learning. And
Yeah,
so, if a development team is not learning as much, both about the code that they're creating, the system that they're creating, and also about the business process that they're supporting as part of this,
yeah,
then that's going to have significant medium term implications for what they're able to do because they aren't going to be able to change things as easily because they don't understand what it is they're trying to achieve. And
yeah,
that is also a particularly troubling point to watch for because the learning of a development team is part of the output, which sounds
yeah,
kind of weird, but it's important when you remember that software is not a deliver once and you're done kind of product. It's a constantly evolving product. And therefore, when you're
yeah,
thinking of what makes for effective a good product, you also have to consider the process of creating the product is part of the assessment of the quality of the product itself, which is not
yeah.
something we're used to seeing in a lot of other places.
Yeah, I totally agree. So when you say that the use of AI may reduce learning, do you mean that's because developers may be more, careless at putting out these drafts created by AI without putting a lot of thoughts into this because it feels easier to do this?
I think that is one part of it. I think other parts of it include, I mean, one of the most useful things about AI that I'm hearing is it's really good at helping you if you're working in an unfamiliar framework, right? You bring in some new framework or some new platform, the AI can tell you, can generate lots of stuff to use that framework. So it gets you moving much more quickly. But the question is then, are you actually learning that framework? Because if you're not
Yes.
learning it yourself, then you've got less idea of how to utilize it effectively, what its capabilities are, and how you can really work with it. And that will lower your effectiveness going forwards. And then similarly, as I said, the business context. I mean, are you interacting with your business people that you're working with on the business side, understanding their needs and desires, and figuring out how best the software can support that? As has been pointed out, I mean, a lot of the focus on AI and software has been on the programming side, writing code, writing tests, maybe. But that's actually only a small part of a software developer's job. A lot of a software developer's job is understanding what software needs to be written, understanding what it is your users and other customers are trying to achieve, and how you can make the software help them with what they're doing. And a lot of AI efforts aren't focused on that much at all. It's actually an area that some of our folks have focused more. We've been preparing this tool called Haven, which is something we use internally, but we have made available. And the idea is to support other things, not just the code part of software, but also things like coming up with, threat modeling, right? Can you come up with quite good questions to ask in terms of threat modeling? Because again, AI is very good at generating questions and ideas. And then our job as humans is to react to those and say, well, are these ideas good ideas or not? And work with that.
Yeah, it's true. The main focus so far has been on coding, but there are reports saying that on average, the time that developers spend coding is like 15% of their time, like up to 20% of their time. So if you have any expectations about productivity gains from coding with AI, that is a pretty strong, ceiling that you cannot surpass.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you mentioned, for example, the usage in writing regular code versus testing. And of course, testing is one of the domains that you have explored the most. Do you have an opinion about whether AI and humans will split tasks? Humans will write tests and AI will write the code, or AI will write just everything? I mean, do you think test versus regular code is something that we should pay attention to as to how we divide our tasks between humans and AI?
That's not clear to me at this point. I mean, it strikes me that AI can be equally useful at coming up with a first draft of tests as it can with a first draft of code. And maybe as a critique of tests, of saying, here's this code, here's this test suite, what am I missing? Because again, it's generating ideas. What the generative part of it is generating ideas, generating drafts. And that can be at all sorts of different places. But the important thing is that you're then, as a human, looking at those and saying, well, those ideas are good, those ideas aren't so good, and I know how to sift through them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there are also other reports suggesting that, I mean, of course, there are AI optimists and AI pessimists around what is the impact also on the job market, on the role of software engineers. And there are early reports suggesting that junior engineers may have a harder time because AI somewhat behaves like a very prolific junior engineer in some contexts. And maybe this also ties into what you said before, that AI reduces learning and may also be hard for young people to that come into the job market just with their coding skills, because that's what AI is the best at, as opposed to, I don't know, collaboration, system design, and whatnot. So what do you think? Do you think that skills required by engineers will shift? We will see different space in the job market for different kind of people. Have you thought about this?
Well, there's definitely a skills shift in the sense that one of the skills that we need to know is how best to utilize AI, right? Both in where it becomes useful. I mean, the skill of knowing the difference between a draft and a final product, but also in how to prompt an AI to be able to get the most out of it. I mean, it's an often under recognized skill in software developers has been how to do searches efficiently and how to find stuff and be able to, again, sort out the wheat from the chaff when you're doing a search is an important part of that. And, you know, similarly with an AI, you've got to learn how to best use the prompts and what kinds of capabilities. Again, tooling can help. I mean, one of the things that we did with Haven was very much to try and enrich prompts and tweak the prompt so that people didn't need to know so much more the sophisticated part of that. They could just focus on what it was that they were trying to get at. So that becomes a skill. And I think that is very definitely a shift in skill, knowing how to incorporate AI in your work. Because I don't think software developers are going to be made unnecessary by AI, but software developers who don't use AI will be made redundant by those people who will use it effectively, which is true of any tool, whether it's IDEs or databases or, you know, whatever, infrastructure as code. I mean, if you need to learn how to use technology most effectively. There is, I think, an extra challenge for junior folks because in many ways AI can it doesn't replicate a senior developer's good taste, but it can replicate a junior developer's enthusiasm and ability to churn out lots of stuff. But of course, one of the most important properties of a junior developer is the fact that you can turn them into a senior developer. And that's one of the crucial things that any organization needs. It needs that ability to generate more people within. I mean, one of our biggest strengths always at ThoughtWorks across the whole 2 decades that I've been with us is we're very good at turning junior people with promise into senior people who are really, really good. And that's a core strength that I'm glad to know internally we still recognize, because that's going to be, I think, more and more important in the future as we learn to make use of the ever-changing roles of technology. And I think it's something other organizations need to look at as well. The most important value you have in a less experienced software developer is the ability to turn them into somebody who is more experienced and knows your domain and how to make use of the technology landscape that you're in.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that's the most important long-term angle. There's also, I think, a short-term counter-take in favor of young engineers, maybe, that is, maybe young folks will be more proficient and eager to embrace the use of AI, maybe than, you know, more seasoned than senior folks. So maybe all this concern about young engineers is a bit exaggerated because they may jump in, you know, mega productive, while others are more resistant, you know, to use these tools.
Yeah, I mean, it's always important to bear in mind that old fossils like me aren't necessarily as good or as eager to learn the latest thing. Of course, I would counter-argue by saying one of the reasons one of the secrets of what success I've had over the last couple of decades has been I've been very good at ignoring things that have turned out to not be important in the long run. And at the moment, I am most certainly not ignoring AI. I think it is something that's important in the long run. Unlike, say, blockchain, which I was happy to mostly ignore.
Did you ignore it from the get-go? I mean, did your taste suggested it that it didn't matter from the start?
When I looked at blockchain, my feeling was there might be 1 or 2% of something valuable in there. And then what I learned was no, not even the 1 or 2% seems to be any value. I mean, it's always tricky because I always have to bear in mind the fact that I am wrong sometimes. So even when I'm ignoring something, I'm also wary of the fact that I can be wrong. But no, I was always pretty negative about blockchain. I always felt that they didn't really have telling a story as some people felt.
Yeah, but I love your quote about being good at ignoring what doesn't matter. So I will go on a little bit of a tangent here because, when there are new trends and things that change very often, and there is also always this, opportunity cost. Maybe you want to spend time looking into it, but maybe it doesn't matter, or maybe it changes so fast that what you learn doesn't matter tomorrow. So how do you decide? I mean, you, Martin Fowler, how do you decide whether something is worth of your attention, is worth of your attention right now to dive more into it versus ignore it or just dip your toes a little bit into it? Do you have a thought process about this?
Well, one of my main things is listening to my colleagues. I have colleagues who I've built a lot of respect for over the
Yeah.
years, and when they have an opinion on things, I make a point of listening to that. So that's important. So, in a general sense,
Great
that is
answer.
build a network of people with good taste and listen to
Yeah.
them. That's a very important property, and that's property inside and outside your domain. So that's also particularly valuable outside your domain of expertise, is to have good people that you can trust within that. And what marks out those people, I think, people who are reasonably skeptical of even the most promising things, not to the sense of completely dissing something all the time, but of that cautious skepticism, not super enthusiastic, but not casting things aside all the time, is, I think, a valuable end. A focus on the outcomes. What can I use this for that's useful? As opposed to digging into details of how it works. They need to know the details how it works, but they also need to appreciate the value and the output that it provides. That kind of personality, also a personality that looks for and kind of seeks out nuance and complexity. If somebody says, "Oh, there's a simple answer to this," that immediately raises my questions upon the value of what that person is saying, because I found that in life that things don't tend to have simple answers. There tend to be hidden complexities. So I look for people who don't try to hide that nuance or that complexity, but seem to appreciate that it's there. Whenever somebody says something and it seems too good, too simple to be true, that's usually, well, the fact that I phrased it that way gives away that indication. So that's some of the things I look for in my network. And also in terms of pundits generally, people I read on the web and that kind of thing. I'm always looking for people who, like I said, embrace that nuance and complexity and don't try to shy away from it, who understand that you can have two things that are in tension, two things that are both good but not so good in cases, and you've got to balance between them, who realize that the dosage of something is the difference between a beneficial drug and a poison, and are interested in where that dosage limit is. Those kinds of things, I think, are good signs. And then beyond that, I tend to look for what are things that I think are going to be still important in 10, 20 years' time, particularly when it comes to writing. I don't want to write something that's going to only be valuable for the next 6 months, most of the time.
Yeah.
So I try to look for things of long term. And so that tends to be general principles, architectural or design patterns, as opposed to particular libraries or frameworks, because often once I understand a particular pattern, I can use it in lots and lots of places across lots of different languages and frameworks. And that can be really, really valuable. So an example of that that is strong in my mind is when I first discovered what I call collection, functional collection methods like map and reduce and filter and things like that. When I first discovered them in Smalltalk, and I realized, oh, there's a powerful library here, but there's a general principle of what you can do by composing these operations. And then they gradually spread to more and more languages. But the point is, the lessons that I learned in one language go immediately over to the others. So I become very familiar working with them in Smalltalk and in Ruby. The first time I started working with the R programming language, which is a very, very weird and different programming language based on statistics, I could immediately say, oh, I know, it has support for these features. I can use map, I can use filter. I know how to do this right away. And I can immediately take all of that knowledge that I'd built up in Ruby and Smalltalk and take it to this whole different environment that's a very alien environment, but can be incredibly productive because I know how to use the core principles. So that's what I often look for. What are the core foundational principles behind something, as opposed to its manifestation in a particular place? If you understand the principles, you can take those principles with you in lots of different ways.
Love this. I mean, I absolutely love this answer. I also think this ability to create this kind of abstractions and go back to the first principles of what makes a technology, a pattern, or whatever, I mean, valuable. It's one of the core qualities of great engineers. And I think it's also one of the reasons why, if you look at books and foundational works of software engineering, the things that you have written, and also others that highlight programming patterns and approaches, they're all like 20 to 25 years old, but there's, I mean, those principles and those approaches, even though we have changed technologies and languages and frameworks all the time during these years, pretty much stand the same. I mean, it's not like, as you said, MapReduce. You can take the ideas and apply it to as many programming languages and situations you want, and so other system design patterns and stuff. You have, if you go after that kind of abstraction ability of taking from first principles, then these ideas stand the test of time.
Yep. And that's why that's one of the things I really like to focus on, are those kinds of things, because partly because I find them most interesting, but also partly because, of course, I find them most valuable.
Yeah, I completely agree. So segueing into something that is, I would say, evergreen as well, and one of the most popular topics, I think the most popular topic on my own newsletter of all the times, is technical debt. Whenever I talk about this, there are always strong reactions from software engineers, from managers, from basically all kinds of stakeholders. And you wrote Refactoring, which, as a practice, in many cases deals with reducing what we call technical debt. So, first of all, this is again similar to things you mentioned before. This is an analogy, a metaphor, some kind of principle. And why do you think it has been so successful and it speaks to so many people and it's so widely used by basically everybody in tech?
That's a very interesting question. Why has it? It has really caught and resonated with people. I suspect because debt is, financial debt is such a touchy and big issue for us in our rest of our lives, and therefore creating that connection between something we feel in a programming system and something we feel in a broader world that can be appreciated by people who aren't programmers. That's a really
Yeah,
powerful connection when you draw the two together.
yeah,
I feel often that some of there's a lot can get lost in the translation, but
yeah,
that, I think, is part of the resonance. I think it also ties in with one of the most awkward elements of software development, which is the fact that in so many things in our lives, we see high quality as being expensive. And
mm,
yet, when it
mm,
comes to writing software, high quality is actually cheaper. And the debt metaphor is one way of approaching that um, unintuitive characteristic of software that people feel they can kind of latch onto a little bit. But it does get thrown in with a whole bunch of other stuff about nature of our relationships with debt, which is, a complicated thing in its own sense.
yeah. So do you think? I love to explore this. So because do you think it's a good metaphor after all, or it makes you think about other related concepts that do not really apply to the way we deal with software? Maybe that you're bound to pay back this. That it's I don't know. Are there parts where this metaphor falls short to you?
Oh, certainly the metaphor has its problems, and the problems are sometimes because of the fact that it is only a metaphor and people try to stretch it further than it should be,
Yeah.
but also because people don't necessarily have a good understanding of financial debt itself, and therefore
Yeah.
then take the wrong use the metaphor in a bad way because they due to their lack of understanding. So there are definitely problems. The thing that most appeals to me about the metaphor, and the place where I tend to use it most, is it makes you think about the decision of, when you have debt, do I continue to pay the interest or do I look to pay down the principal? That
Yeah.
choice is, to me, the crux of where the metaphor is interesting. And the heart of this is the interest payments is how much harder it is to do the work because of the fact that we have this imperfection in our code base. And therefore, instead of a task that would take us 3 days, takes us 4 days instead, or 6 days, depending on the level of debt that we've got in there. And then do we
Yeah.
continue to pay that interest, or do we tackle the thing that's causing the problem, which is effectively paying down the principal, which will reduce our interest payments in the future? And that
Yeah.
trade-off is where I think the debt metaphor is at its most valuable, because it gives people a sense of, oh, this is why we need to pay down the principal, because it's going to reduce our interest payments in future. Or the
Yeah.
decision of, well, actually, the interest payments aren't really that great, so we shouldn't spend effort trying to pay down the principal. And I like the way it kind of makes that decision, helps crystallize that decision, and also gives us a way of communicating that decision process to other people outside of the software team. And I think that's where the metaphor is at its strongest. I
I
actually
agree.
don't like using the term technical debt that much. You find I don't actually use it that much in my writings. And when I talk about the bad stuff in the software, this stuff that's the principle, as it were, that's causing our
Yes.
effort to be gone, I don't use the word technical debt for that stuff. I use the word cruft, which is another long-term
Yeah.
programming term. And the reason is I kind of want to separate it from the metaphor. Technical debt is a metaphor to help us think about how we deal with cruft, rather
Yeah.
than the thing itself. I like to think of that as a separate item.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's useful in those contexts where you have to reason about those kind of decisions that you have to make. I mean, paying the interest or repaying the principal. But many cases when you're dealing with pure software, you don't need to think. You don't need to think in those terms, and so that metaphor be even distracting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to dealing with craft, I mean, a lot of your advice in refactoring, and not only in that, is it's about preventing basically those things from happening, doing small scale
Yeah,
refactoring all the time when you are in the process of doing some change to this or that part of the code. You figure out something, it's a bad smell, and you refactor it in place. Do you think that that's the primary way people should, the primary kind of process that people should put in place, like inserting some slack in the development process to allow people to do this kind of activity to prevent debt or craft to pile up?
yeah, I'm definitely of the best way I know to deal with keeping your internal quality high and therefore your costs low is to focus on those practices that minimize craft. And that really does boil down to the kind of stuff that the core practices of extreme programming. Refactoring is one of them, of course, but also having good tests so that you can be confident when you change things that you're not breaking things, and continuous
Yeah,
integration so that you know that what you do today doesn't screw up somebody else tomorrow. And these
yeah,
are the core elements of that picture, and it's still the best way that I've come across to handle these things. But what's difficult is communicating that to people who've never lived in that world. I've been
yeah,
particularly taken with another metaphor that Kent Beck and his daughter Beth Anders Beck have been talking about recently, of the forest and the desert. That
yeah,
says that the environment that we have, where we can control craft and we work in this kind of healthy manner, it's like living in a forest. And most people that haven't come across this world, they're living in a desert. They can't imagine what the forest looks like because it's just so different in the environment. And some people have spent some time in the forest and then gone to the desert, or vice versa, and they begin to see that
Yeah.
difference. But for a lot of people, it's very hard to communicate what you can do in the forest and how fast you can move and how you're not encumbered by the kinds of things that are just normal living in the desert. And
Yeah.
a lot of it is based on these practices. I really
Yeah.
have felt, and it's reinforced through. I mean, I live in a relatively foresty environment working at ThoughtWorks because we're very strong XPers on the whole in the organization.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we could be stronger, but on the whole, we're a lot better than most places, and that gives us that different picture. But it is hard to communicate what it takes to get there. And
Yeah.
also, so many people want something that's a quick process to get there, and it's not. It takes a really deliberate effort. And also, what makes it harder is it's also the human setup, the setting up the human relationships to make this work. Things like the psychological
Yeah.
safety of a team becomes important. You want a team. There was a recent post by a former colleague of mine who said that one of the signs of a healthy team is when people are regularly saying, my bad, my mistake, sorry. And that admitting of error becomes natural. And it's part of how we work with.
Yeah.
And if you have a team where people aren't ever saying that, that's a sign that you're actually in a bad place or heading into a bad place.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's one of the areas where people have really the most trouble when it comes to technical debt related topics, and both when it comes to putting in place practices for preventing it, keeping room for good practices in software development, but also when it comes to paying it back. Usually, what I found is that the problem is not, at least not often, that the technical word is particularly hard. It's that it's hard to advocate for it with people who are non-technical stakeholders. So, and that's where, I wouldn't say the metaphor breaks, but the metaphor only helps, up and up so far,
Mm.
because then people can't really understand the forest. So how do you make other people understand how the forest works? How do you advocate for strong technical work with other stakeholders? What's your
Well,
experience?
that is the difficult thing. In fact, you could argue, I think, that that's the failure of people like me, is that we haven't been able to spread the forest as widely as one would think we would be able to, considering how nice it is in here. Um, one thing I do advocate strongly always is that we must concentrate on the economic benefits of being in the forest. Um, I when somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, we're not doing enough refactoring on this code base because our bosses won't let us spend the time to refactor," or and they begin to catch it in terms of professional responsibility, right? Oh, we're not doing a job of being proper software developers because we're not spending the time writing tests. That
Yeah.
always troubles me because I feel that at that point they've already lost, because they're couching it
Mm.
in terms of you must pay an economic cost so that we can do a better job. And it doesn't work like that. The reason we want to write tests, the reason we want to refactor, the reason we want to do these things is so that we can produce more, so that we can lower our costs and produce more value. And we always must couch anything we want to do in terms of these kinds of practices, in terms of it makes us go faster, it makes us produce more value, because that's the reason
Yeah.
we're doing it. I'm not interested in writing tests to mark up some scorecard to click off a happy, to get Kent Beck's approval or something. I don't care
Yeah.
about that. What I care about is, can I get stuff done more quickly? And I found that by writing lots of tests, I get stuff done more quickly because I spend less time debugging. I find that if you actually talk to the people who use your software, you can produce more valuable software because you understand what they're trying to do. And as a result, you can come up with ideas that they wouldn't come up with for what the software can do to help them. And often, the way you find out whether a piece of software is going to be useful is to build a simple version of it and see if people find it handy. And
Yeah.
you might find that 4 times out of 5 you're wrong, and people hadn't found it handy. But that 5th time is so valuable, it makes up for all the others. But you
Yeah.
can't do that without a constant conversation between you and your customers, you and your users. And
Yeah.
so these kinds of things, we do them not because they're right, as it were, in some moral sense. We do them because they make us more effective and more productive, and it's for economic reasons. So
Yeah.
whenever you're tempted to advocate for one of these practices, and you feel tempted to say, "Oh, I should do it because it's good," slap yourself on the wrist. No, the only reason you do it is for economic reasons. And if you lead with economic reasons and always focus on economic reasons, my belief is that that will get you somewhere. But
Yeah.
then, as I said, we've not been as successful as I would like to have been at spreading the forest over the last 20 years. So maybe you young guys need to come up with something, some new technique that we old fossils haven't tried.
I mean, I'm trying to do my part. No new techniques so far. I'm afraid of, but can totally. I mean, in my small experience, can totally relate with what you said. I think one of the problems is that when you advocate for some work that is about productivity, about enhancing the developer experience, it never lives in isolation. It's always pit against other initiatives, maybe on the product. It's a trade off, and new features and stuff you do on the product many times have like a direct effect on the business that is easier to measure, increase conversion at checkout, increase the revenue, while all these other things have like second order effects with longer feedback loops
Yep.
that are harder to prove and to demonstrate. Hence, all the conversations, for example, on engineering productivity metrics, measuring how a team performs, because I think that's how, in part, you can measure that you are getting better. So, do you believe in making engineering in processes more measurable and getting the hard numbers of how well we are working, how much we are producing, or are a little bit overhyped those as well?
Yeah, I have a tension here. On the one hand, I do think it's important we come up with better ways of measuring and I would say more broadly assessing the effectiveness of engineering processes and code quality and things of that kind. On the
Yeah,
other hand, I also recognize how difficult it is and how easy it is for measures to get used badly.
yeah,
And people will often latch onto a measure that might be useful and then use it way out of context and get into a lot of difficulties with that. But there are some folks around who recognize some of that work. I mean, some of the things like the space framework that's built on Fedora, the work
yeah,
Nicole Forsgren has done with that. I mean, understanding that we've got some multidimensional thing, um, that kind of stuff can be really, really valuable. Um, I had, I'm now desperately trying to remember because I had some really good stuff with some folks from on developer experience
mm,
that have been really again focused on understanding often that qualitative information
yeah,
can be as valuable as anything else. I'm scrambling a bit here because I'm desperately trying to get the name of the guy who wrote this piece, and it's not coming to my head, and I'm feeling embarrassed because I want to give his name.
absolutely no problem.
So, okay, I found the article. Abhi Noda, that's it, who's
Oh,
working with
Abhinoda.
DX.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yes,
talked
the
a bit
great
about
one.
that and the importance of qualitative data in understanding this. And I've
Yes,
seen some recent pieces by him and other folks that have begun to look at that kind of thing. And that
yeah,
kind of stuff, again, a lot of it is focusing on nuance, understanding again the difference between a dosage. There's a difference between a benefit and a poison.
yes,
These kinds of things are what he's been focusing at, and we're beginning to see, I think, some good measurements. Also, Adam Thornhill, who did Your Code is a Crime Scene, and also been doing some
yeah,
really interesting work. These people, I think, are heading in the right kinds of directions. And
yeah,
I'm always
agree.
wary of the word measure because to me, measure measure tends to mean a simple quantitative picture of something, and we're a long way away from that. So I like kind of a fuzzier word like assess or evaluate, right? That
Yes.
brings in the fact that it's a multi-dimensional space that we don't really know how to get all the details of. But when people are beginning to focus on that, and when people are saying, well, you can use this measurement to a certain degree, but you don't want to go too far down this route, and beware of how it's easily gamed or misused, then I'm beginning to hear things that I'm comfortable with. And I think we're making some progress there.
Yeah.
That encourages me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and especially about combining quantitative data, the so-called measures, with qualitative data, talking with people, surveys, and really picking up things that are hard, to measure through telemetry, as we may call it, right?
Right.
So I totally agree, and I want to go back to something you said before. That is, in the past 20 years, you said you haven't been that successful, in your opinion, in spreading the forest and these practices that you, Kent, and others you've been advocating. So I want to ask you basically the same question that I asked it to Kent earlier this year when we had him on the podcast. That is, why? Why do you think many of these practices, like TDD, pair programming, even continuous integration in some circles, and many agile practices are still divisive or are met with resistance?
Yeah. Now, this is where I wish I had a better memory, because I listened to that interview and I don't remember what Ken said, so I can't just parrot it. I mean, in some ways, the problem is we don't know why. If we knew why, we'd fix it. Um, I think some of it is due to elements being counterintuitive. I mean, the notion that high
Mm,
quality code is cheaper is a counterintuitive notion, because it's
yeah,
different to how we run into other things. So that's part of it, is the counterintuitiveness. Um, Particularly, again, if you've not been in the forest. When people talk about refactoring, and I don't like refactoring because my code will be broken for days, which immediately tells me they don't understand refactoring, right? That kind of thing is difficult, because I think you have to spend a bit of time in the forest to appreciate even how the pieces of the forest work, let alone how it all works together. Because they do only work because they all work together. If you try to refactor and you don't have good tests, you're going to have some unpleasant experiences. Um, so there's that's part of the picture. Um, Part of it is also, it's easy to get distracted by things that work in some contexts and then get spread to others. The thing that strikes me most about that, of course, is this notion of the dominance now of um, code review being something you only do pre-integration as part of a pull request process. Which is a notion that's come from the open source world, where it's very applicable, and has been brought into lots of environments where the context has changed and it's no longer an effective approach. It's a case of, in the patterns world, we talked about how it's problem, context, and solution. You have a problem
yeah,
in a certain context, this solution is good. But if you change the context, then the solution no longer is a good solution. And that's exactly that lack of appreciation of context, as what's caused that domination of pre-commit code review, as spread into places where it should never have gone. And of course, one of the worst things about that is people don't realize that code review happens in so many other places. Every time I'm going back, touching some of my old code that I wrote 6 months ago, I'm reviewing that code.
it's a review.
And I will find it wanting sometimes, often, and we'll fix it. And in a healthy team, you have that process, which is why refactoring should be so inbred within an organization, because you're constantly reviewing your code. And you're reviewing it not on the basis of what you think this code's going to do once it's committed. You're reviewing the code based on what it has done in the last 6 months, which is way more information. And therefore, you've got a much better code
Yeah.
review process. But if people don't think of that kind of continuous code review as being part of code review somehow only can occur at a certain point in the process, then then they're losing out on so much.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the idea of not going back to first principles about why you're doing something, and rather cargo culting a practice because either everybody is doing it or someone influential is doing that, and you apply it to your context and it doesn't work. And
Mm.
I think code reviews are a perfect example of something that have fantastic merits, but done wrong, they create incredible bottlenecks to the delivery of so many teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the trouble is that it's the forest is a combination of practices, many of which sound counterintuitive. I mean, probably the most of all is pair programming, right? Which
Yeah.
lots of people find really hard. I mean, I know that it's one of the hardest things that we have to convince our clients to go with.
Yeah.
And yet, it so much ties in with all of these things that we're talking about to create this very different and more productive environment. And yeah, we've struggled to fully communicate. And in fact, part of the reason that I've been involved with ThoughtWorks for so long, rather than being independent, is because I want to create a forest, at least as a place where people can spend a while and see what it can do. They can see what the forest looks like, and that's to me that is the most valuable way to spread the forest. Is just to say, hey, come in here, see what it's like. And then they
Yeah.
realize, oh, I don't have to live with all this sand around me all the time. I don't have to have the sun beating on me every hour of every day. There's actually an alternative. And then they may not be able to create a very good alternative where they go to, but at least they have a sense of the difference, and that can pull us
Yeah.
forwards. But as I said,
Do you think?
considering how
Do,
much better the forest is, it is kind of sad that we don't see a lot more of it around.
yeah. Yeah. But when you think it, you mentioned pair programming, very divisive. We can name TDD just as divisive. Do you think, and or counterintuitive, we might say even better. Do you find that when you show others the forest in its depth, and you meet somebody who is skeptical about this or that, let's say pair programming, and you make them experience that in full, do they become a convert, or it's really a matter of personal preference in many cases, which is, I think, what many people hide behind. It's not for me because that's how I am, as opposed to this is the right way of doing things.
I mean, there is an element of personal preference here. Um, the 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 thing I sometimes think about here is the difference between myself and my sister and how we approach vacations. So my sister wants everything planned out. On this day, 3 months in advance, we're going to be eating at this restaurant. Everything planned out to the last detail. While I'm a kind of, well, we'll show up in this country and probably, and I have done this, read the guidebook on the flight out there and figure out what we're going to do as we're going along. And I'm comfortable with that level of uncertainty and the responsiveness that I get to it, which has sometimes been incredibly beneficial. I had a vacation in Italy where we were planning to do some hiking for most of our vacations. We're big hikers, and my back went out the week before I went, and I couldn't hike. And had we planned everything out in advance carefully, it would have been a disaster. But as it was, there's always something else to do in Italy, so we figured out something else to do. That kind of reacting to external change is the great advantage, of course, of being very of not of taking this more adaptive approach. But for some people, they really don't like the uncertainty that they feel, that the not knowing, exactly this is what I'm going to be doing in 5 days' time. And that personality shift is there. And it's
Mm,
something that's easy for me to overlook because, hey, I'm comfortable with the adaptive approach. And that affects in terms of pairing. Some people say they don't like pairing because they're introverts. That isn't the difference because I'm an introvert and I quite enjoy pairing. I don't get the chance to do it very often, but I enjoy it when I do because it's a different kind of interaction with people that doesn't trigger the introvert
mhm.
triggers for me.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there aren't people who don't find pairing comfortable. and naturally they need to find a different route. I very much do believe that the teams need to find the way that makes them the most effective, and that may not be the way that I would choose because the different people are different. But I do feel that there's a lot of people that would enjoy the forest that don't experience it and haven't experienced it. And it may be that some people will come to the forest and say, I don't like the desert, I don't like the forest. Give me, I don't know, something else. Give me, prairie grass or something. That's what I want. And that's fine. But I do feel that people should get the opportunity to experience the forest. And then they can make a decision based on some real understanding and knowledge of the difference as to whether that is the place they want to be.
Yeah, I think it's a good answer. And do you think that other than these ideas being counterintuitive or feel uncomfortable at times, there is an element behind the fact that they're not more widespread than they are, that they're also presented poorly. Like, comes to my mind the fact in many circles, agile itself is often perceived as corp speak,
Right.
or Kent said in the interview that agile has been co-opted by the authorities.
Yes.
So do you think there is an element of that as well?
Yeah. I mean, that's always the way with these things, right? I mean, you come up with something like this, and there's always the danger that something like that will happen. There's a phrase I love, and I have got to find it because I want to quote it exactly from. Let me see if I can get it here. You can always cut out the. Okay, I've got it. So the phrase that I love about this is from Alistair Cockburn. He said, "Only one of two things will happen to your brilliant idea. It will be misrepresented and misused, or it will be ignored. And you don't get to choose which of the two will happen to it." And I mean, I thought Agile would be ignored. And my goal was to say, I would least like to make Agile and XP into something that we at ThoughtWorks could do. That wouldn't be just kind of hounded out right away and said, no, you've got to work in this in a non-effective way. You're not allowed to go into the forest. You have to be in the desert. And I think to some extent we've succeeded in that. I mean, we do find clients who say, yeah, we want you to work in the way that you find is effective, and you want to teach us to work in the way. And they get at least a glimpse of the forest, and they realize that that's where they want to go. And to that extent, we've been incredibly successful, because I thought it would be hard to get that far. But it isn't helped by people who kind of look at one scrawny tree in the middle of oceans of desert and say, that's the forest. That tree there, that's the forest. And a lot of the safe agile world, unfortunately, does look at a couple of trees and mistakes that for a forest. And that's a big shame, because that's not what it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I guess as long as we have good patches of forests here and there, and we can thrive in there.
Yeah, that's the hope, that there will be enough patches of forest for people to thrive in. And maybe it just takes longer than even I thought it would take. I mean, I always felt this was going to be a shift that would take generations. I kind of hoped that by the time I get old and creaky, that I'd begin to see some real progress. I am now old and creaky, and the progress has been less than I am hoped for. But that doesn't mean I stop. I keep pushing along, and I will continue doing what I can to help my younger colleagues continue pushing it forwards. And that's my role now, is to get out the way and help the younger folks make the push that and hopefully they can get to a place where I was hoping to get to but didn't make it.
Well, you have certainly helped me, and so thank you again so much for that. And I will try to do my part to spread the forest.
Yeah, keep pushing. I think we can. We can get more progress in the forest. And if not, at least we're in the forest, all right?
Exactly. That's the silver lining. So Thank you, Martin, so much for this chat. I absolutely loved it. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.